My name is Dr. Elowen Marchand. I'm 36 years old, and at this exact moment, I'm sitting alone in the back row of the ceremonial courtroom inside the John Joseph Moakley Federal Courthouse in Boston. My heels click quietly against the marble. As I take a seat, no one's reserved. That's fine. No one expected me to be here anyway. Up front near the judge's bench, my family is gathered, proudly pressed suits, pearl earrings, straight backs. My younger brother Clayton stands beside our father, about to be sworn into the Massachusetts bar. A newly minted attorney following in our father's footsteps. The golden child, the one who did it right. A few rows ahead, I hear my mother whisper to someone, "We're just grateful one of our kids found their way." And then my father, Arthur Marchand, former state prosecutor who still speaks like every sentence is, evidence stands to give a short pre-ceremony toast. He doesn't look toward me. He raises his glass and says, "Justice isn't just about knowing the law. It's about honoring it. And we're proud that at least one of our children never walked away from that duty." I don't flinch. After so many years, you learn how to swallow things whole. They think I left Harvard Law in disgrace, that I couldn't handle the pressure, that I folded. What they don't know, what they were never allowed to know, is that the moment I walked away, I was being recruited into one of the most classified arms of the Department of Justice. Now I lead investigations into federal corruption, judges, senators, even former U.S. attorneys. I carry credentials that can open sealed doors in D.C. I've helped dismantle bribery rings inside courthouse walls. My job is to find rot where others see tradition. And my current assignment, it involves someone sitting just a few feet from my family. But none of that matters today. Today I'm here as the invisible guest, the washed-out sister, the disappointment they mention with tight smiles and quick subject changes. The judge presiding over Clayton's ceremony is Gerald Stone. To my family, he's an old friend, dinner party stories, and rounds of golf. To me, he's the centerpiece of an ongoing investigation. Offshore accounts, illicit campaign donations, undisclosed conflicts of interest. And based on the way he stiffens when our eyes meet, he remembers exactly who I am. I lower my gaze, let them enjoy their moment, let them keep believing I'm the quiet one who couldn't keep up. For now, I used to walk the halls of Harvard Law with the kind of focus that made professors pause mid-lecture. First-year contracts, constitutional law, criminal procedure, I devoured them. I was the first to raise my hand, the last to leave study groups, and the one classmates whispered about when grades came back. Top 5% early clerkship interest, even a faculty nomination for the Federalist Society leadership track. I didn't drink much, didn't date. I had a plan, and if I kept my head down, didn't get distracted, I could make it all the way, maybe to the U.S. Attorney's Office, maybe even a judgeship one day. Then came Professor Hallgren, a name that still curls in my gut. He was respected, published untouchable. He also had a quiet reputation for making certain students advance faster under vague mentorship deals. Most people ignored it. But when I found a printed memo buried in the wrong file, something about a cash contribution tied to a federal clerkship recommendation, I didn't look away. I didn't look away when I found a second one either. I took it to the Internal Ethics Committee thinking that was the right thing to do. Thinking justice meant speaking up. Within days, my email access was revoked. One professor who'd once praised my appellate brief suddenly refused to acknowledge me in the hallway. Whispers started. So did the pitying looks. Then came the phone call. Unlisted number. A woman's voice on the other end. Calm, direct. She said she worked with the Department of Justice and was part of a task force watching certain elite institutions. Mine was one of them. She said someone like me, observant, disciplined, unflinching, might have value if I was willing to disappear from one world and enter another. The decision didn't take long. I withdrew officially a week later. No explanations, no appeal. My mother cried on the phone. "Are you pregnant?" she asked. Like that was the only possible explanation for leaving a life so promising. My father didn't speak to me for weeks. And when he did, it was only to say, "You made your choice." By Christmas, the narrative had solidified. Elowen cracked, couldn't cut it, walked away. What no one knew was that I was halfway through my DOJ clearance process. That I'd already started learning how to track digital transfers across shell companies. That I was training with agents who spoke in code names and moved in silence. They thought I quit because I was weak. I left because I saw something wrong, and someone gave me a badge. For the past 12 years, I've missed more Christmases than I've attended. I've sent gifts that arrive without a return. Call replied to my mother's group text with vague, "Hope it's warm in Boston" messages, and quietly withdrawn from every family tradition I once loved. I always had a reason, a work crisis, a colleague's emergency, a flight that got canceled. My family eventually stopped asking questions. Somewhere along the way, my cover story settled into place like dust on forgotten shelves. I worked at a small private forensic firm, low profile, low impact, and most importantly, unremarkable. My mother would sigh during brunches with her friends. Elowen's sweet, but she lost her path. We don't talk much about it. My father, when asked by former colleagues what I was doing these days, would simply say administrative research in the private sector and steer the conversation toward Clayton's growing list of accomplishments. Meanwhile, I had memorized 3 separate aliases, worked under 2 non-official cover identities, and spent more time in federal court basements than I did in my own apartment. I'd interviewed judges whose names graced courthouse plaques. I'd chased wire transfers through 8 countries and unmasked bribery rings that almost rerouted election funding. There were days I walked into rooms wearing a wig, armed with nothing but a legal pad, and the kind of clearance level that made security guards step aside. One Christmas Eve, I finally made it home for dinner. I wore a wine-colored sweater and smiled like I hadn't spent the last 72 hours debriefing a whistleblower whose confession would shake a congressional subcommittee. Clayton, 3 glasses in and basking in praise from our uncle, leaned over and smirked. At least I passed the ethics bar exam. Everyone laughed, even our dad. I did too softly while buttering a roll. I didn't say a word. 2 days before that dinner, I'd sat behind mirrored glass giving sworn testimony to a closed federal oversight panel on judicial misconduct. The hearing lasted 6 hours. My name will never be in the record. They think I'm quiet because I gave up. But the truth is, I'm quiet because the work I do can't be named. And because sometimes protecting the system means letting the people inside it think you're nothing at all. Judge Gerald Stone used to hand out candy canes to the neighborhood kids at our family's Christmas parties. I remember his booming laugh echoing through our foyer, his hand always resting comfortably on my father's shoulder like they were teammates in a game only they understood. Back then, I thought he looked like someone who belonged on a postage stamp, white hair, commanding voice, a face built for confidence. Now he's the central figure in Operation Foxhole. 3 months ago, our team began pulling threads from a quietly buried audit tied to a lobbying firm in Maryland. The trail led to Stone his wife's name on a Cayman shell company quarterly transfers from anonymous PACs and a real estate holding registered under a consulting firm that doesn't exist. We mapped it. We confirmed it. And 2 weeks ago, I signed the summary for escalation. What I didn't expect was for his name to appear on the ceremonial docket for my brother's swearing in. I'd already RSVP'd no. I planned to work straight through the weekend until I saw the docket come across the internal database. There he was, Judge Gerald A. Stone, officiating, front and center. I brought it to Director Vale during our Monday briefing. She glanced up from the file, her voice flat. He's going to recognize you. If he's smart, he won't say a word, but he might. She didn't tell me not to go. She never does. She lets us weigh the operational risk for ourselves. But she added just before closing the folder, "You've worked 12 years in shadow. Just make sure you're ready if the lights turn on." So I booked the flight to Boston, rented a car under one of my travel aliases, packed conservative clothing, nothing that drew attention, nothing that looked federal. I memorized Stone's known body language under pressure, reviewed the last 12 months of his public appearances, calculated potential exposure outcomes, courtroom lobby post-event reception. It wasn't public embarrassment I was preparing for. It was the private kind. My father's eyes narrowing, my mother's hand tightening around her wine glass. Clayton staring like he didn't know me. Gerald Stone doesn't know I'll be there. And my family has no idea the man they're about to toast might be wearing handcuffs in 6 months because of me. The courtroom was packed rows of navy suits, pearls, and polished shoes, each family trying to look like they belonged in the future their child was stepping into. I chose a simple black dress, hair pulled back, no makeup except concealer for the fatigue under my eyes. Nothing about me said federal, and that was the point. I kept my eyes low, hands folded, not out of shame, but out of discipline. Clayton sat in the front row directly beside our father, who looked like he could barely contain his pride. He kept adjusting his tie and whispering something into Clayton's ear, probably courtroom jokes or advice about owning the moment. My mother wore her best navy suit, pearls gleaming under the lights, posture immaculate. From where I sat, I could see the back of her head tilt slightly every time someone praised Clayton. Then came the sound of shuffling papers, and Judge Gerald Stone stepped to the podium. He looked almost unchanged from the man I remembered as a child, except now I knew what was behind the smile. He began his remarks congratulating the incoming attorneys, emphasizing the sacred weight of legal ethics. I could tell he was on autopilot, the kind of speech a man like him could deliver in his sleep. But then 2 minutes in his gaze drifted. Past the parents, the graduates, toward the back. Toward me. His mouth paused mid-sentence. A flicker of confusion passed through his eyes. Then realization. He hesitated just long enough for me to recognize the shift. I tilted my chin slightly, the smallest nod. No threat, just presence. But instead of regaining composure and moving on, he surprised us both. He cleared his throat, looked out across the courtroom, and said, "Before we proceed, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge someone present today whose integrity changed the course of my career, though not in the way she may have intended." The room quieted. Dr. Elowen Marchand, Senior Investigator, Department of Justice. The silence was immediate and absolute. Heads turned. My mother's neck stiffened. My father went rigid. Clayton's body leaned ever so slightly forward, like he was trying to make sure he'd heard right. Stone continued, his voice level now. "Your investigation reminded me of something I'd forgotten: to respect the law. For that, I thank you." My breath didn't catch, but the courtrooms did. It didn't matter that half the people didn't understand what he was talking about. The title alone, Senior Investigator DOJ, said enough. For the first time in my adult life, my family was looking at me not like a problem to be handled, but like a variable they hadn't accounted for. I didn't smile, didn't nod, just sat still, every instinct in me reading the room, cataloging reactions. I had prepared for many things, but I hadn't prepared for being seen. The reception was held in a side room off the main lobby, lined with catered finger food and muted congratulations. The usual buzz of professional chatter and family pride had taken on a strange quiet, like everyone was waiting to see who would speak first. I stood near the back, nursing a ginger ale I hadn't sipped, still wearing the same expressionless calm that had carried me through field interrogations, surveillance ops, and closed-door briefings. But this wasn't federal court protocol. This was family, and no manual covered what to do when your father was staring at you like you just stepped out of a classified file. Arthur was the first to break the silence. He turned slowly from the dessert table, his voice low but carrying. "DOJ, since when I met his eyes, there was no point in deflecting. Since Harvard, I was approached during the ethics investigation. I didn't drop out. I was recruited." His brow furrowed, jaw tight, like he was recalculating years of assumptions. My mother said nothing at first. Her hand trembled as she adjusted her bracelet, her mouth slightly open. Then softly, "We thought you were lost." I said. "I was doing what I was trained for, what I was cleared to do." For a few seconds, no one responded. Then Clayton stepped closer, the same law school smugness replaced by something else. Curiosity, maybe even awe. That thing last year with the DA's office, those sealed indictments. That was your team, wasn't it? I didn't answer directly. The prosecutor on that case was flagged by our division 2 years ago. Let's just say you weren't arguing alone. His eyes widened. He leaned back like the room had shifted under his feet. My father exhaled slowly the way he used to before giving a closing argument. So all these years we thought you'd given up, and you were running investigations into federal corruption. That's the job. And the cover story, he asked. Standard protocol, minimal exposure, safer for everyone. My mother's voice cracked slightly. Do you know how many nights I stayed up thinking you didn't know who you were? I knew exactly who I was, I said gently. You just weren't allowed to. No one applauded, no one cried. But for the first time in years, no one looked past me either. And that was more than enough. Later that evening, after the reception had thinned and the polite congratulations had given way to long, stunned silences, I found myself back at my parents' house. The rooms looked smaller than I remembered, furniture familiar but faded walls that hadn't changed, but somehow felt more fragile now that the air between us had shifted. My mother disappeared upstairs for a few minutes without a word. When she returned, her heels silent on the carpet, she carried a cardboard box taped at the edges, yellowed with time. She set it down on the coffee table in front of me and knelt beside it, smoothing her hand across the lid before peeling it open. I kept these, she said quietly. I don't know why, I just couldn't throw them away. Inside was my old Harvard Law ID badge, the edges slightly bent. A worn folder labeled LON, commendations still sealed. I opened it to find a few early letters from professors praise I'd never shared notes about potential judicial clerkships I'd never followed through on. And tucked beneath it all, a thin manila envelope. This came last year, my mother added. No return address. We weren't sure what it meant. I took it and carefully slid out the contents, a single-page DOJ certificate, non-specific, intentionally vague. Just a line at the bottom, in recognition of service, in matters of national integrity and judicial security. It wasn't proof in the way they might have once wanted. No job title, no dates, but it was real. And now it was theirs. My father had remained silent, standing near the fireplace, hands clasped behind him. When I looked up, he was staring at the envelope like it was a declassified document he'd waited years to read. You protected people like me, he finally said. His voice wasn't trembling, but something inside it had softened. And I failed you. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He took a step closer, then another, and extended his hand not as a father, but as a man who understood what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself. Thank you, Dr. Marchand. I took his hand, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like mine was being seen for what it truly was. The backyard still smelled the same freshly cut grass charcoal smoke and the unmistakable tang of lighter fluid that my father still insisted on using, no matter how many times Clayton offered to upgrade the grill. It was the 4th of July, and the Marchands were hosting as usual. Folding chairs lined the fence. Flag-themed napkins flapped against paper plates. The small crowd included neighbors, family friends, and a few of my father's old colleagues, men with gray temples and stories that started with back when I was in court. This time, I didn't arrive late. I didn't linger near the driveway or wait for a text to pull me inside. I walked in through the side gate carrying a homemade berry crumble, and I didn't flinch when my father spotted me from across the yard. He straightened, not stiff like before, but proud, and when I reached the grill, he turned to the small circle of retired attorneys and said, "Gentlemen, this is my daughter, Elowen, DOJ." There was no hesitation in his voice, just fact. A simple introduction, but weighted in a way only men like them understood. There were no follow-up questions. Just a few respectful nods, and that was enough. Clayton found me near the cooler a little while later, holding 2 plates piled high. He handed me one with a grin. "So, you're the reason the DA panicked at closing." I raised an eyebrow and took the plate. "I can't confirm or deny." He laughed. "We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to." The sky was starting to turn pink, and someone lit the first sparkler. I wasn't standing outside the circle anymore. I was in it. Finally. On my own terms. For years, I let my family believe I had walked away from everything I once promised to become. Let them talk around my name at dinners. Let them speak of me in softened tones like I was a chapter that hadn't quite turned out. I wore that silence like armor not because I didn't care, but because the job required it. Because justice doesn't always wear robes or stand behind podiums. Sometimes it sits quietly in the back of a courtroom watching. Sometimes it works through aliases, encrypted files, and closed-door briefings. Sometimes it looks like failure until the truth has room to speak. I didn't show up to prove anything to them. I showed up because that day mattered to my brother. I showed up because the people we become, in silence, deserve to exist in the light too. And because even in families like mine, rooted in tradition, blind to nuance, there is room for truth. Eventually. So if your family has ever misjudged you, if they've decided who you are without ever asking, don't spend your life trying to prove them wrong. Live in a way that stays right. And let time do the rest. Because eventually the truth doesn't whisper. It stands up. And it's heard. If this story meant something to you, please like, comment, or subscribe to Revenge Scripted. And remember, sometimes the quiet ones are carrying the most weight. And sometimes they're the ones holding it all together.